For the conclusion to Fordsgiving, I decided to cover one of Harrison Ford's most iconic science fiction action roles. A role that demonstrated the core humanity he continually strives to inject into projects and characters that he finds merit in. And by now you've probably seen the thumbnail or read the title of this video and are kind of rolling your eyes at me and saying, "Really, Mike? This character?" Well, yeah. No sarcasm. Honestly, Han Solo and Indiana Jones may be more appealing and heroic figures, but Rick Deckard is genuinely very fascinating to me.
And I genuinely feel that the draw to this character for me takes root in several creative factors. Certainly Ford's approach to Deckard's portrayal in the films is paramount, but there's also the representation and thematic utilization of the character pre-film adaptation to consider. Not to mention the production's notorious state of creative and financial flux when it was being made, and the myriad of creative differences and interpretations amongst the storytelling team over the years.
And while I appreciate the film in all of its various permutations, I will be referencing primarily the final cut version from 2007, as I feel that is the most cohesive version that is able to successfully combine and amalgamate all the different creative parties' interests and goals into one solid narrative. And of course it goes without saying, spoilers ahead.
To start things off, the original Deckard in Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a far different animal from the film version. While still an outwardly very melancholic figure, the character certainly isn't nearly as steeped in bleak nihilism as Ford's portrayal is. In the book, his impetus for accepting the job of retiring the Nexus 6 models is more beneficial in his favor. He'll be awarded with a big payday to buy himself an actual organic animal to replace his robotic sheep, thus cheering up both himself and his emotionally distant wife.
Yes, this is the actual plot of the book. And for those of you out there thoroughly confused, here's a little bit of context.
There's an underlying element in Dick's world building that crops up here and there. In the not-so-distant future, not only are synthetic humanoids being utilized as slave labor, but a majority of the planet's animal population is also artificial. Thus, owning a 100% organic animal is seen as something of a high status symbol. While serving as the initial motivation for him to take on the task of hunting down the replicants, this apparently minute detail is what further separates Book Deckard from Film Deckard. Book Deckard enters the story with a clear-cut goal: complete the task at hand as a means to an end in him finding closure for his current existential crisis. As the story continues, it only then becomes more apparent what lessons Deckard really obtains. Reflections on what truly constitutes reality, grappling with the constant questions of identity, and finally, grasping some sense of empathy for all manner of beings, regardless if they're comprised of flesh or circuitry.
This is a journey that spans all of Dick's novel, a definitive character arc with fully realized setup and payoff. And while I genuinely feel that Film Deckard gets a satisfactory resolution over the span of 2 films, his setup isn't necessarily as fully developed as the books, which is intriguing to me and most likely infuriating for everybody else.
From word go, the film Blade Runner always seemed to have some shared thematic DNA with the world of pulpy detective stories and film noir. This is apparent in the preliminary drafts from original screenwriter Hampton Fancher, focusing scenes more around tense dialogue between characters that are conducted in confined spaces and rooms, never really giving way to the grand spectacle of the futuristic setting beyond those walls. Fancher's successor on the screenplay, David Peoples, would lean in further with the film noir element, incorporating an unused minimalist opening scene that introduces Deckard, and later on, Fancher and other screenwriter Michael Green, I felt lovingly incorporated that opening into 2049.
You police? Are you Sapper Morton?
And there is something to be said for Deckard being a send-up for pulp or noir detective protagonists. Somewhat.
pulp heroes and detectives of that particular ilk certainly are sometimes portrayed at times as being rough around the edges, even fairly ambiguous with regards to their values and moral compasses. But in most narratives, there is at least one key aspect to keep us tethered to investing in their journey as the alleged protagonist, even if it is something more self-serving such as preservation of image or reputation. When talking about his hard-boiled character Sam Spade in the introduction to the 1934 edition of The Maltese Falcon, author Dashiell Hammett said, "Spade has no original. He is a dream man in the sense that he is what most of the private detectives I worked with would like to have been and in their cockier moments thought they approached. For your private detective does not, or did not 10 years ago when he was my colleague, want to be an erudite solver of riddles in the Sherlock Holmes manner. He wants to be a hard and shifty fellow, able to take care of himself in any situation, able to get the best of anybody he comes in contact with, whether criminal, innocent bystander, or client."
And Blade Runner certainly gleams these characteristics in Ford's Deckard, but we're never actually given a very solid mission statement on where the character officially stands. And coming off feel-good films like Star Wars or Raiders of the Lost Ark, that could certainly have been a very maddening experience for an audience of Ford fans.
Gone is the smug yet charming rogue and the brave skeptical archaeologist standing up to oppressive fascist regimes. In their place stands an outmoded enforcer of the system, who's facing burnout with his lot in life, and passively goes along with hunting down undesirables in society like cattle. Actually, I kind of feel like his complacency is a perfect foil for the bleak outlook Ridley Scott and company perpetuate throughout the movie. Much like Deckard, Los Angeles 2019 is bleak, dilapidated, run down. Ironically, the only true moments of vivaciousness or life spring from the replicants, which I think is the filmmaker's intent. To have the Nexus 6 group led by Roy Batty ultimately be sympathetic to the audience, despite playing the textual roles of antagonists.
So we have a central protagonist seemingly going through the motions of his own meaningless existence, doing away as he will with characters that are actually exploring the themes of self-identity and discovery that were prevalent in the original book. And again, I hear you through the screen asking what I find so fascinating about such a dull asshole like Deckard.
Memories. You're talking about memories.
Well, to lift from another pulpy trope.
Okay, I know the backstory of how this movie was made is a lengthy topic in and of itself. There have been full-length books written about it, and even feature-length documentaries that are lengthier than even the feature's runtime. Bottom line, all aspects of the production were hell. Harrison Ford didn't get along with Ridley Scott, Hampton Fancher didn't get along with Ridley Scott, producer Michael Dealey didn't get along with Ridley Scott. Basically, no one got along with Ridley Scott. And yes, even the story's central relationship between Deckard and the replicant Rachel wasn't left untouched by complications.
You're reading a magazine, you come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
Just answer the questions, please.
I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb in saying that relative newcomer Sean Young was cast in a role that was probably way beyond her capabilities as an actress at the time. Both her and Harrison Ford have gone on the record several times in saying that their scenes together are unbearably awkward, and moments of genuine chemistry are few and far between. And that actually kind of works for this story.
I do believe in the artist informing the art, and even if shooting was pure misery for Harrison Ford, he takes that frustration and uses it fully to the role of Deckard. We may not be let in on the full reason why he is the way he is, but his real-world tension with the movie's production informs the cold, emotionally detached presence of the character even better than anticipated. For example, these scenes with Rachel can speak on two levels. One, Harrison and Sean both kinda recognize their incompatibility with each other as actors and try to make the most of the scene. Two, Deckard is trying to wrap his head around empathizing with a replicant, comes up short, but tries to make the most of it.
That is surprisingly in line with the original portrayal of the relationship in the novel. Settling is a remarkably persistent theme throughout this entire narrative.
Now, that's not necessarily what a lot of movie audiences look for in their high-concept escapism. For the most part, people want some satisfying and definitive emotional conclusion to their characters, be it closure on a romantic arc, a fully realized hero's journey, or a grand lead-up into things to come. It's been my experience with the movie-going populace that frustrations arise when things are left more ambiguous and without the promise of following up. Such is the case with Blade Runner.
Putting aside the original studio release of the film with the mandated happy ending of them driving off into the sunset together, Deckard and Rachel were supposed to originally leave on a giant question mark.
It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
By the end of Blade Runner, there is the sense that Deckard has taken away something from his experiences with the Nexus 6 group and Rachel, developing some sort of empathy, a sliver of appreciating life again, breaking from passive conformity, who knows. At the end of the final cut, their lives now forfeit, Deckard and Rachel are set to leave together. Both of them don't really know how to feel about the situation, let alone each other. Door closes, black screen, I'm left wondering. Not hoping, but wondering what could have come next.
It made me want to revisit the film again and again just to see if there were these little clues or hints throughout the story that could allude to what his ultimate fate would be. And for many years, I accepted that those definitive answers would never come in my lifetime. Q 2017.
When word of the Blade Runner sequel first dropped, I was pretty skeptical of the outcome. Answers that I didn't necessarily want to hear were on their way, and while the creative team instilled more goodwill in me for the project, part of me always questioned what twists could possibly be in store for perpetually down-and-out Deckard this time around.
Quite a few, as it turns out.
The movie is more focused on Ryan Gosling's replicant Kay more so than anyone else. All in all, he seems a lot more accessible in his role as protagonist than Deckard ever was. He's efficient, has a far healthier relationship dynamic, and appears to mostly know what he wants to achieve when revelations start dropping. If anything, themes are way more overt, and the new film now firmly takes up residence in siding with replicants as our heroes. Underdog, second-class citizens trying to survive the brutal and dispassionate overrule of the cold and calculating humans.
Which begs the question, where does that leave Deckard, our original point-of-view character who found himself at an emotional impasse?
What's her name? Rachel. You didn't even meet your own kid? Did you want to?
Not really,
Why not?
because we were being hunted. I didn't want our child found, taken apart, dissected. Sometimes to love someone, you gotta be a stranger.
And just like that, Deckard finally has his purpose. We learn that in the years between the films, he developed the capacity for empathy, for love, for true sacrifice. And Harrison Ford communicates that wonderfully with his performance. Even when he is enticed with the promise of returning Rachel to him, we see how far he has come and believe all of it. His Rachel is gone, and the feelings he developed for her were non-transferable. They were real. Young Deckard at the start of the first film wouldn't have had such hang-ups, but his experiences throughout the narrative helped lay the foundation for the character's much-needed mission statement that would come to serve him well in this sequel. He grew out of the mold of the noir detective and into the role we, as the audience, were craving from him from the beginning, the affable and relatable hero. And I sincerely couldn't think of a more fitting and ambiguous ending to leave such a fascinating character on.
Oh yeah. Might as well talk about that damn unicorn before we wrap things up here.
Speaking to the scene in Blade Runner where Deckard dreams or envisions Ridley Scott's B-roll footage from Legend and how that is totes confirmation that Deckard himself is a replicant.
Growing up, that was a fun enough theory to speculate on, but now that I'm looking at the films with a more critical eye and I'm older, yeah, no.
I may have teased in my initial 2049 review about how it's good that Denis Villeneuve never confirmed or denied the theory in his story, but upon further reflection, I tend to think the idea undervalues any of the original intent.
The idea is there and toyed with in the original book, but it's not left up in the air quite the way it is in the movies. Deckard's arc is about him rediscovering aspects of his humanity in a world that is mostly artificial, just based solely off of his interpersonal experiences with all these characters. To have it be revealed in the end that he too was artificial the whole time I feel kind of defeats the point of it all.
That thematic element of recognizing humanity in the inhuman was already being explored in characters like Roy Batty and Kay pretty well. And as time has gone on, really only one member of the film's original creative team has stuck to their guns about the Deckard replicant theory.
And at this point, it just feels like Ridley's hanging on to that theory out of some creative defiance against his naysayers, as opposed to actually considering the cohesion with the overall story. If the theory is your cup of tea, fine, I won't take that away from you. It just personally doesn't do it for me anymore.
Because Rick Deckard is the ultimate cautionary tale for humanity. What are we left with when our complacency and need to suppress the harsh reality of our situation overcomes us? How do we find our way back to the basic tenets of what constitutes humanity? How can our empathy thrive in a world that is devoid of it? These are questions and stories worth exploring, and not allowing them to become lost in time.
Like tears in rain. Time to die.
Excuse me, Miss Salome, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm from the American Federation of Variety Artists.